Over the last few years, there's been an accelerated push to incorporate technology into education in ways that can drive learning, rather. The question is, should we expect learners to embrace technology as a learning tool? The numerous benefits that are associated with using technology for young students. Should early childhood educators embrace the use of technology in the classroom? And if so, how? And what can EdTech do to support this initiative? How can technology inculcate literacy and numeracy skills and lay a strong foundation for learning, most especially in the 21st century, where literacy skills can no longer be detached from ICT. In this month's EdTech Monday show, we will debate the use of technology in the early childhood development sector and the impact that it has on literacy, numeracy, and other essential 21st century skills. And I have a skilled panel to discuss this with me today. I want you guys to introduce yourselves first, starting with Alan.
Thank you, Raymond. My name is Alan Nanyonjo. I'm a STEM coach at E Squared Young Engineers, Uganda.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Raymond. My name is Pal Mogala Ingrid. I'm a program manager for what we call Fundi at School. I work for FundiBots. So Fundi at School is just everything that we do in schools, and I'm an EdTech and education technologist.
Thank you, Raymond. My name is Robert Okirere, and I'm center manager at STEM Cafe, Kampala. So basically, STEM Cafe is a network of maker spaces distributed across a few cities in Africa. So basically, we work with kids 5 to 18 years.
Maybe I want to start there. Science and technology being linked. What's the space for science and technology in children at a young age? What does it give them? What edge does it give them in terms of innovation and thinking?
So this is, that's a very important question. If you look at kids, for example, say 6, 7, or 5, they're usually very inquisitive. They are capable of learning everything. So when you introduce them to technology, it actually spices their learning journey. If, for example, there are specific programs. For example, if you teach them maybe in a classroom setting, right, in a normal school setting, but if you take it to a nonlinear approach, where you're going to incorporate technology into it, there's a way it actually triggers kids' interest to learn. Say, for example, if a teacher is teaching math, say in a classroom, usually, me at STEMCAF sometimes we engage kids, ask them, for example, do you like math? They may tell you a question like maybe no or yes. Assuming someone tells you no, you try again, go ahead and ask why. So usually, after your interaction with kids and say, okay, I'm going to give you a math lab here, but this one being powered by technology. So when you introduce them to that math lab, for example, you find that it's being triggered, they're usually being motivated by the aspect that technology has been brought to that lab. For example, in a normal classroom, when maybe a teacher is teaching about fractions, you find that the teacher writes in the blackboard, right? But you find maybe this is a class that has around maybe 100 students or pupils. A teacher might not get a chance to go and check each and every kid what you've written. There's no personalized learning, right? But if in that case scenario you find usually kids even end up shying out from their teacher. Reason is because they are afraid. But if you introduce the tech labs here being powered by, the math labs here being powered by technology, you find that one, there is one-on-one interaction between you and a kid, but also above it, there is an aspect that technology can bring in, like say whenever a kid scores say 1 + 1 and a kid says 3, there's always that upload that technology can bring, like that motivation that the kid feels like this is something that I've never done before. So at the end of it, ask the kid at the end of that interaction, personalized learning through play. Then you ask them, so do you still like math? So what's your judgment there? Assuming you told me last time you don't like it, has it changed anyway? They will tell you, yes, now I like math. You ask them, why did you like it? This math is different from the one I learned at school.
It's actually experience.
Yes. Yet actually the same math, but here you find that technology has been brought to learning. It makes it more interactive, and it brings play to it, and kids love learning through play.
Paul, if I could come to you, and I know that you guys do robots, basically learning, problem solving through robotics. What's been your experience with young children being exposed to robotics and their ability to solve basic problems?
Okay, So yes, like you said, Fundibots majors on using robotics to teach STEM. So we have the child we don't do what other people have done before, where someone has to use something that is already created. Instead, they are going to sort of come up with it for themselves. What do I want my robot to look like? What do I want this artifact to look like? So they're going to be creative themselves and think about how it should look, how it should function, and then even building the circuitry within the robot, they do it themselves. So we've seen actually something very interesting in the recent past from our M&E, that the younger children really exhibit a lot of interest and a lot of creativity, even more than older children. If you just said something as simple as build a house, the younger children are coming up with this idea of, okay, what if my house was standing on 2 poles and it's at the top, then how do I make it stable? How do I make sure that people can use this house well? Which is really severe. It's a lot of critical thinking. A child in secondary school may fail to give you all that detail about the thought that they're putting into making a building, while these young children are now exhibiting after about 2 terms of doing this robotics program, because they start with the basics. Before you make a moving robot, you start with, how can I automate a house, a smart house? I'm building a smart house. And they have a lot of imagination, a lot of creativity in there. So we've seen that actually this integration of robotics for those younger children, you have to do it a bit slower than you would do it for an older child, because, well, their foundations are still very shallow. But at the same time, the things that you're sparking in them are things that cannot be removed easily. They are going very far with what they have learned.
Alan, how do you introduce children to technology? I know that we've spoken about that the technology is good for them, it helps them with critical thinking, but how do you introduce them to technology?
Well, basically, not only technology, but I think the best way to introduce a child to a new concept is through play-based learning. Because naturally, kids love to play. Even if you ask them, your homework and playing, what would you opt for? They will opt for playing. But if you combine play and doing homework, they will do both better. So one way you can introduce play-based learning is, first of all, to observe them. Because if you observe them while playing, you'll know that they are really great scientists, great doctors. They will try to imitate characters of doctor, trying to nurse the others while playing. Also, they will try to imitate things like construction while playing around with toys. So through play-based learning, I think it's one way we can introduce our children better to the things to do with technology.
For the time that you've worked with young children, and particularly like if you apply play-based learning, how fast do they adapt to the technology that you introduce them to?
It's really quite amazing and impressive how kids can really grasp things when you introduce them to play-based learning. For example, at Young Engineers, we use what we call Kenex bricks. They are color-coded and a little bit bigger. So since they are really very good at grasping like colors, you can really see progress, like in them following the instruction manual to build something. Since they are like color-coded, it's very easy for them to fix different things together and to follow really instructions. And by them accomplishing something which they're following on the instructions, you can really see that they are really good and making progress.
Robert, if I could come back to you, what's the space in the curriculum for these new types of learning, for STEM, for the use of technology? What's the space in the existing curriculum for that?
Per se, can say there's a lot to be done when it comes, for example, to curriculum. If I talk in particular around the area of STEM. If you look at, for example, kids, Alan was just trying to give an insight into how kids, for example, can be introduced to technology. But if for example, like if you see a STEM course, we have a program called Physical Computing with Arduino, which basically introduces kids to circuitry and things like that. But you find the age bracket work here. We work with kids, say we work with kids from 5 to 18 years. So when you're teaching those, say from 15 to 18, they might understand differently. But also if you teach those ones from say 8 to around 13 or 14, they might also understand differently. But if you look at these ones from 5 to say around 7, they might understand it differently. But the important thing is not to ignore any of the age bracket. The question you need to understand here is, how should we introduce everybody to benefit from technology, for example. So if I am instructing a program called physical computing at Arduino, I have to be creative a little. Make sure that you break content down in a way whereby each and everybody within the age bracket can benefit out of it. So it's just a process that involves a lot of evaluation and keep iterating each and every time. So say I am introducing a kid to basics of circuitry, but then you reach to a stage whereby you know that these kids are going to understand this concept as compared to that one of, may say, 15, 16 years. So what you need to do, we find that we at STEM Cafe will introduce them just the basics of some most important components. But you find that we have some assembled kits, right? What these assembled kits do here is they practically try to explain some of the components that they looked at, understood during the normal session. So it has to be an iteration process whereby you keep adjusting content each and every time to meet the beneficiaries, to meet all these kids you're dealing with.
What's the space in the curriculum for the kinds of education that we've seen which enhance critical learning? What's the space for that in our existing curriculum?
In our existing curriculum, I think for the primary school curriculum, there's been a lot of emphasis on building skills, and learners have been asked to craft things and build things on their own with their own hands, which I think is already creating that room that we can actually add technology on that angle, as well as maybe later on add it to the classroom itself when we can provide all the technology aspects that are required. But also in the secondary school curriculum, the new secondary school curriculum emphasizes implicitly, very explicitly actually, that the learners need to have physical skills. They need to be able to do something with what they have learned. And I think that with that change in the curriculum, they are opening up the door for technology to come in, but also for STEM as a whole, because STEM generally is the amalgamation of the four aspects, not just learning them separately, but putting them together. It's a good playing field for STEM to come in and then bring that transformation to the learner, where they can have critical thinking, problem solving, and various other things built into them. Yeah.
Alan, do you think that there should be some changes in the existing curriculum to accommodate STEM? Are there other aspects that you've noticed that the curriculum doesn't accommodate currently?
Well, currently, first of all, I want to appreciate the government into looking into the new lower secondary curriculum. And also in 2016, we realized that the government put an emphasis into promoting early childhood education into community-based, or rather government-based schools. I think it's really a good opportunity to schools that are really out of the city. And I think it's really nice that the students or the teachers or the policymakers and other stakeholders that are involved, it gives them room or an opportunity to embrace STEM at an early age, since the fact that the government has decided to really put an emphasis on early childhood education in government schools, because in the recent years, most government schools were starting from primary one, missing out on the emphasis on early childhood, which is really a critical age in the child's development and growth in the learning journey.
Robert, let me come to you and ask a rather complicated question. There are many parents who are watching this program, and the one thing they'll tell you is that kids at a young age are heavily distracted. And technology, it has a destructive component to it. How do you keep the attention of a child within an ECD so that they can learn the concept without being distracted?
So this is the thing. You find that during those sessions, you realize there are kids totally, from the time they join the session, they're totally distracted. They're not actually into it. So what you have to do, you find that we as STEM Cafe, we could start sessions by bringing some interactive learning session, a specific activity that's so interactive, outside even what we're going to discuss. So when you use that approach just to bring the kid into actually what's basically going to be discussed. If I'm going to introduce the kids to basics of 3D design and modeling, I'm going to introduce you to a lab where that showcases you. If you actually learn more 3D design and modeling, you can actually design a big building like this. And it will be talked that you're the one who designed how this house looks like. Don't you think this will sound good to you? When you design such a big building, they say, yeah, this actually sounds good for me. So from that, you trigger the kid to actually be curious to see what's going to be discovered ahead. So automatically that, the kid picks interest and the concentration is going to be really so high and until the session ends. But again, another thing you have to look at here is that these are young people. They can be so curious, they want to learn a lot of things at the same time. But you need to look at how long are you going to be engaging them in the, say for example, in a session, either physical or online. So if you say you overstretch a session, automatically, they're going to lose concentration and they may lose interest and they're going to be distracted.
All right, let's take a very short break. When we come back, we continue the conversation on STEM in the early childhood development. Thank you so much for staying with us. We're discussing the role that STEM can play in the early childhood development. And before we broke off, we were talking about attention spans, but I want to come back now with a really more serious topic, and I'll start with you, Alan. Technology by itself is expensive to come by. And the one thing that we've noted in education is the inequalities that come with education. What can we do to make technology easily accessible across the board for everyone so that they can learn and not be left behind?
Well, one of the challenges into incorporating technology into schools or even early childhood development centers is the financial constraints and repercussions that come with it. However, I think schools can benefit from open source technologies that are available. For example, Google has a lot of open source technologies schools can incorporate in their education, as well as the old-fashioned way of education. Schools used to have abacus, things like that, things to put together using local materials. I remember back then they used to use yam plantations, the suckers, they used to cut them into small and then they would teach. It was really a great tool to teach children about mathematics, which is one of the components into STEM. So I think schools, they shouldn't think more of incorporating these things from the Western world, but rather look at the local materials we can use to incorporate or close the financial burden of buying equipment like building blocks. We can use the abacus to replace that. But I also want to encourage that even if schools are using, there are some schools that are using technology, smart technologies right now. They're using smart boards. They're using digital pens to teach children sounds and letters, like to improve on their literacy. I also want to encourage them not to put away the play-based, physical play-based learning as a way to promote technology into children, because it builds their integrity, or rather the soft skills. Yes.
Paul, what can we do to make technology readily available so that no children are left behind?
Okay. I think on our continent we have maybe a slightly complex challenge. First of all, like you said, technology is expensive. Now, if, for example, a donor decided to give you the technology, because it's expensive, there's a high chance that school will not be willing to leave it in the hands of children. Why? They cannot replace it. It's so expensive. So, for one, I think it would be good to be able to subsidize. I think I saw in a school somewhere in Hong Kong, they had subsidized the cost of technology, and they had a lab where the children shared a certain computer, but that computer you could only log into it with your password. So maybe we are both students at that school, maybe all three of us, but each one of us is using the same computer, but everyone logs in with their password, and then they can review their own projects, their own things, but it's kept with the teacher, and you're always sure that the children are not going to break it. So I think we need to lose that fear of spoiling it, because children have to use things to benefit from them. Then there is the other thing that people maybe don't have electricity as well. So sometimes you have the technology, but technology requires other things to support it. So possibly building of infrastructure is something very necessary for us to be able to use technology in schools adequately. Yeah, that's what it is.
Robert, how do we bring down the cost of technology for schools to be able to use it?
Before even I discuss it at the context of the schools, just from my friend here has said, if you look at the mindset of even the parents, because technology here, we don't have to look at it even at the perspective of a computer, but we can look at it as a perspective of even the normal devices we use, say phones, even just normal button phones. So how are we using them, for example, for learning? You realize that if we allow that kids have to get exposed to technology right now, because it's going to be something they're going to be living from now, present, up to the future. If you have that mindset, then actually it opens opportunities for kids to get using these devices. Say, for example, there are a lot of learning content that can be put to these phones, right? So if, for example, a lot of initiatives are developed by the players in the industry, say, for example, and say you have content that can be actually being delivered through the normal devices we have. If that mindset of the parents is like that, how can that kid, for example, benefit from the use of technology? So that mindset has to be firstly properly understood, and let us accept that kids have to get exposed to this now, because this is what something they're going to be living. It is going to be the 21st the skills of the 21st century. But if you look at the perspective of schools, let's look at it as something we can start as a shared resource. We may not necessarily look at it as something that if a school has a population of around 700 students, you may not necessarily have to consider it as having 700 computers, for example. But we can look at it as, say, can we have experiment of just, say, 5 computers in a school? This can go to policymakers, see how can we revise education a little bit more better. So if you have, say, 5 computers, and we say, let's experiment this. Each and every time a kid accesses, say, a computer and learns something around maybe, say, math, say, programming, say you learned how to design a circuit online, they won't change. The mindset keeps changing around that kid. When the mindset keeps changing around that kid, the kids start thinking in a wider perspective. I know that especially a lot of learning centers, early child learning centers, some of them actually around maybe urban areas can have access to this. But of course, I'm aware that in, say, local areas in the villages there, they may not be there. Even if these early child learning centers are there, but you find that maybe they are being manned by a group of volunteers that are not really well skilled. So the point I'm trying to make here, yeah, even if there are these computers, you can have a sample of them, say, 5, 10 computers, assuming a school is able to get it in the village or even around the urban setting. But do we have the right people that are going to help these kids use these computers appropriately? Say, do we have good educators, and do we have good content? Because content is something different, because if you expose a kid to a specific content, specific program, say you expose the kid to programming, that kid is going to be demanding more of it. But remember, they may not have access to these resources all the time. But assuming the time they have access to these resources, how can they continue with their learning journey without necessarily you being involved? So this is something we need to look at. Yes, we need to ensure that we can use things like sharing these resources, having a few of them, let them be just used for experimenting as we try to see how other players can come in. I know a lot of initiatives. Say, for example, we at STEM Cafe, we're not just looking at working with kids. Maybe we're in urban centers who can afford our programs, but we also open working with different stakeholders that can actually take us down there to give these kids such access to certain resources like this. Even if meaning having certain mobile labs this is something that really interesting. So there's a lot of collaboration that's required here at the same time.
Paul, the thing that I've found the most around STEM is that for it to succeed in ECDs, there has to be early adoption of STEM solutions from people that have gone before them. So, for example, there has to be mentorship. Someone has to see that there's a pathway to success in this. Have you noticed any early adoptions, any success stories along this path that can create mentors?
Early adoption stories, not here, but we have them in research. Some places where maybe you've had children who have trouble with speaking or pronouncing words right, and then maybe their teacher is also not able to do that. And then, as you know, maybe in early childhood, if you know, a child will probably study A consistently for a very long time before it's like, that's A, or that's B. So that repetitiveness that is needed sometimes can't be done by a teacher. So there's been some research done where technology has been used to do that repetition, even after the teacher has done the initial introduction of the content. But for sure, there is definitely a need for a pathway, because teachers generally are trained to make sure that there is a goal that is achieved. And for that goal to be achieved, they need a certain pathway, what people call curriculum. It's a pathway to the goal. So even when one wants to adopt it into our country, for example, we need to understand our context, the context of our teachers and the context of our children, and then create solutions that actually meet the needs of those teachers and those children with a goal in mind, not just having technology in the classroom, because like you said earlier, it can be a disruption, not just in Uganda, because maybe we might think we are backward, but no, even in the Western world, research shows that the technology can bring disruption, not just disruption, but destruction, because it has so much possibility. So for a teacher to know how to harness that technology and how to guide the child from point A to point B is something that we need to invest in before we are ready to roll out. Because if you do it wrongly, you actually have a generation that had a bad foundation rather than a well-founded foundation.
How do you, for example, as Fundibots, then have your success stories of students? How do you let them interact with other students who are just starting out to show them that it's possible to take this route and be successful?
Okay, so what we have done starting this year has been to install clubs. So the club is something that is after Fundibots may have left or may be visiting occasionally, but in that club, and okay, before that club is set up, the children showcase to other children what they have been able to do. They were able to maybe program an entire game and someone else can play that game. And you're thinking first, wait, my friend who is 10 years old like me can make a game someone else can play. Wow, maybe I can do it as well. So then we give you that club situation where you can go and interact with the children now are convinced. Teacher is also convinced because a product is clearly present. You cannot deny where results exist, right? So that is what we have done, introducing clubs so that the learners can continue on the journey of learning and also inspire other people in the same vein.
I want to come to you, Alan, and now that we're closing this show, one, what do you see as the future of STEM in ECDs? And if you could dream as loudly and widely as you could dream, what kind of future do you want to see for STEM education in ECDs?
Well, the future I want to see is, first of all, an incorporation of the theoretical learning as well as the practical learning. Well, STEM falls more of a practical learning, then the theory falls under the classroom writing and copying from the blackboard. So I just believe that there is an opportunity for both theory and practical to thrive because they both complement each other.
Robert, your parting shots and your dream for STEM education in ECDs?
The most important one is there's confidence, but then there's creative confidence. Every kid actually needs that skill set from the start of it. So how can they get these skills? If you look at the entire STEM aspect, kids can actually gain those skills through that. I know that it sounds a little difficult for me to say that because not all kids across the country can have access to this. Parents themselves can be trained as teachers from day one. They can teach their kids to gain creative and confident skills without necessarily them taking them to early child learning centers.
All right, thank you so much, our panelists, and thank you so much also our viewers for staying tuned to this program. EdTech Monday, of course, will return with another episode next month on another Monday. But thank you so much for staying with us, and have yourselves a good day.